Hi everybody, it's Lauren and welcome to the first episode in my new series Page to Screen, where I'm going to be talking about and comparing all the different TV and film versions of classic books. Today we're going to be talking about Wuthering Heights, of which I found 7 screen versions of Wuthering Heights. There might have been more. If there were more, I don't want to do them because that was a lot of Wuthering Heights for me to watch. So what I'm going to do is talk about each of those versions in turn. We'll do chronologically from the earliest to the most recent, and then I'll talk about who overall I think portrayed Cathy and Heathcliff the best, which overall version I liked the most, and which ones I'd recommend for you depending on whether you've read Wuthering Heights or not, or whether you're studying it, and that kind of thing. We'll just have a chat. What I've learned from this project is if you really want to understand a book, watch 7 versions of it because it's amazing. I feel like I understand Wuthering Heights really well now. So just to make sure that you're up to speed with me on my own Wuthering Heights knowledge, I'll just give you a quick summary of the characters and who they all are. So we start at Wuthering Heights, where you have 3 children living there, Hindley and Cathy, who are brother and sister, and then Heathcliff, who is their adopted brother. You also have Thrushcross Grange, where Edgar and Isabella Linton live, and the whole story is narrated by Nellie, who is their housekeeper. You then have all of their children. You have Hareton, who is Hindley's son. You have Catherine, who is Cathy and Edgar's daughter, and you have Linton, who is Isabella and Heathcliff's son. So as long as you can kind of remind yourself of all of those names, then hopefully me talking about this isn't going to go completely over your head. So we start with our first version, which was from 1939, which stars Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff and Mel Oberon as Cathy. What you notice in a lot of these earlier versions is that they only do the first half of the book. So they kind of go Cathy and Heathcliff's love, and then Cathy dies, and then that's kind of the end of the film, and then Heathcliff dies or something, and then they're together. And that's how a lot of these early ones show the book, which I think really, before I read Wuthering Heights, I thought it was all about Cathy and Heathcliff and their doomed love and running around all the moors and just all the things that kept them apart. And when you read the book, it's kind of, that's a really small, well, it's not a small part of it, but that's not really all it's about. But I think it's the fault of some of these films. And they kind of pull this epic love story from where it kind of isn't. And I mean, that's what happens in this film. Heathcliff is like a tragic lover in this film. He's not a mean person, but he's kind of wronged. He's a bit of a victim, and he just kind of does stuff to make Cathy jealous rather than to, you know, wreak havoc on the Lintons and Hindley and get his revenge. He's just more like, oh, Cathy, like, why don't you love me? And Cathy, I don't know if this is just because this is filmed in 1939 as well, but Cathy really is just exactly like Scarlett O'Hara. She's just kind of vain and silly, and she does things because she's proud, and then she's like, oh, I guess I want to be with Heathcliff. But the thing is, I also like money. But I do really like that it's shot in black and white. You've got a sweeping soundtrack, all kind of violins. It's so dramatic. I really wouldn't suggest watching this film now. It's not a great version of Wuthering Heights. It is only half of it, and it sort of does its own thing to its own end. Jumping forward in time, the next version we have is a film from 1970, which stars Timothy Dalton as Heathcliff and Anna Caudle-Marshall as Cathy. Again, this is only half of the story, but for what it is, I really enjoyed this version. I think it's very good. I think if it had been a TV series and I could have got the second half as well, it would have been my perfect version. The secondary characters are really well fleshed out. Nellie, who is often an old doddery lady, is actually the correct age. She's supposed to be the same age as Hindley and Cathy, and she is. Hindley isn't evil. Like, he's not just a tyrant towards Heathcliff just because, you know, he's a mean person. You can kind of really understand his motives. He marries and he has Hareton, but Hareton dies as a child, so you have his downfall. You really understand his alcoholism, and they give him a kind of different motive, which I really like. Edgar is a really good character in this version as well. He's not spoilt or childish or mean. If Heathcliff wasn't on the scene, you could imagine Cathy actually quite liking him and just being like, yeah, I'll marry you because you're quite nice. Heathcliff is not very good. He's kind of tall and lumbery, and he's got this sort of hurt baby animal thing about him, and he's quite silent, and then he kind of lashes out, and I just think, what? It's just really weird. He's not angry or passionate. But I do think this is because a lot of these versions try and make Heathcliff into someone that Cathy could reasonably love, rather than him being crazy and mean, which is what he is in the book. Which I don't think you really need to do. I don't think you need him. You don't need the audience to like Heathcliff. You only need Cathy to like Heathcliff. So I didn't really like their interpretation of him. Cathy is fantastic. I absolutely love her. She's wild and she's naughty, but she's not mean. She kind of is selfish, but not overtly. Anna Caldwell Marshall does a really good job of completely showing Cathy's motives all the way through. You understand why she marries Edgar. You don't feel like she's doing it for herself, and I just think it's a fantastic interpretation. And I especially love her madness scenes. Like, she's properly angry and crazy at Nellie, and she's angry at Heathcliff, she's angry at Edgar. And like, yes, I just think she interprets it really, really well. That's who I want Cathy to be. Although she is so clipped, it's so 1970 when she's running around, she's like, Heathcliff, oh Heathcliff, do come back. But I don't care, I think she's great, and I really liked it. If it hadn't been for Heathcliff, I would have really liked the whole ensemble of this version. I think it's really very good. The next version, oh, let's just talk about this really, really quickly. It was a TV, I think it was a BBC TV adaptation in 1978, which is, I think, about 6 parts maybe. I watched about 2 or 3 because I just turned it off because it was so boring. I think maybe when this was filmed, like, the BBC weren't really down with how they needed to do TV dramas, because they've literally just done the whole book, like line for line, and just put it there. It's like me just reading aloud a book. No one's kind of giving it any sort of acting interpretation. Ugh. Let's move swiftly on to 1992, which is a film version starring Ralph Fiennes as Heathcliff and Juliette Binoche as Cathy. This is the first film version where we get the entire book, and it's done very, very nicely. It's very succinct. They get all of the story in without it feeling laboured. A lot of things are implied, but they're implied really, really quite well. I don't really love the interpretations of Cathy and Heathcliff, but I do think they're good. They're just kind of maybe not what I would have done. Juliette Binoche is not quite as passionate and willful as I would have liked. Ralph Fiennes is quite brooding, and he's not kind of angry enough. I think I want more from both of them. I want more anger, more passion. He's a bit angry, but very, like, contained. But because he's a very good actor, he pulls it off. Like, it's not that he doesn't do it badly. It's just not the interpretation I personally like for those characters. One of the things I really like is actually Cathy's child, Catherine, is also played by Juliette Binoche in this, which is quite nice when Heathcliff is confronted with the face of Catherine, and it is the face of Cathy. I think that is really nice. There's a really good parallel at the end, actually, with Catherine and Hareton running off onto the moors together in love and escaping Wuthering Heights, which is a really nice parallel with Cathy and Heathcliff in the previous generation. It's a good version, and it gets all of the good points, it gets all of the plot in there, which is done really well. Now we get on to this is my favourite version. It's 1998 TV series, I think it's ITV, and Heathcliff and Cathy are played by Robert Kavanagh and Orla Bradley. The thing I like most about this interpretation is it's a little bit longer than the Ralph Fiennes film, but it's a very similar adaptation, actually. They pick out similar parts of the book to have as themes. Again, I don't love the Cathy, but I think it's just because I do love Anna Caldwell Marshall, and I was like, no, you're not her, like, you're just annoying me. But it is good. The interpretation of Heathcliff is very, very good. He does a very good turn at being kind of deceptive with Isabella and being quite charming, and then on the other side being very manipulative and angry at other points. He's not kind of crazy the whole way through, but he has kind of bouts of craziness and bouts of anger, which is, and then other bouts of being brooding, so that was nice. What I really liked was their relationship. This is the most believable Heathcliff-Cathy relationship that we've got. So even though individually they're maybe not my favourite versions of themselves, it was done very, very nicely. And I think the best praise for this film is after this being like the 5th version of Wuthering Heights that I had watched, at the end I actually got a bit sad. As I think if at that point it could emotionally move me, that's really saying something. In terms of other depictions, Edgar is quite spoiled and he's a bit childish, which is not the way I think of Edgar, but if that's what you're going for, then it's done very well. But the interpretation of Isabella is incredibly good. She's not silly and foolish, and like, she knows what she's doing and she's not annoying. And I think that's really high praise. If you can get Isabella to be a likeable character, then you're doing something right. Something I really liked is they actually showed the consummation of Heathcliff and Isabella's marriage, which was really sad, and it just made you think like, oh, Isabella, like, what have you done? And I liked it. It kind of went a little bit further than the previous film and kind of implying things, and I thought it was very, very well done. Now we get on to the really modern versions, and we go to 2008, which was a TV version by ITV again, and it was starring Tom Hardy as Heathcliff and Charlotte Riley as Cathy. This version takes quite a lot of liberties with Wuthering Heights. It kind of jumps all over the place. We start with Linton coming to the Grange, and then Heathcliff going to the Grange and saying no, he needs to come back to Wuthering Heights because he's my son. Then Catherine goes to Wuthering Heights, finds Linton, finds Cathy's diaries and stuff, and then gets told the story by Nellie. So we kind of start at the end and then we move around, which is quite nice because it makes the Catherine Hareton Linton story a little bit more part of the whole thing and not feeling like it's just something that's tacked on the end. Like I say, it's quite a broad interpretation. Lots of stuff happens that isn't in the book. Things don't happen the way that they happen in the book. They kind of happen for different reasons, but it still feels like Wuthering Heights. It's quite good. You can imagine Heathcliff doing this stuff, even if he doesn't do it in the book. You can kind of imagine that he could do it. The real standout performance in this is Tom Hardy as Heathcliff. He is amazing, which we know because he's a really good actor anyway. But what I particularly enjoyed is that his physicality, because he's so tall and so broad, that even when he's not being violent, if he's trying to threaten someone, you think, whoa, you could do some serious damage, and it's good. And he's got that sort of pent up anger in him physically, which I really like. But the version in itself is a little bit, like, some of the way they talk is a bit anachronistic, and some of the clothes, like at one point Cathy's literally wearing like a pashmina scarf. I'm like, did they have that in the 18th century? Really? But it's probably quite a good version. Like, if you're not studying at school and you don't need to know the exact plot, and you're not really that fussed about reading it, or you did read it and didn't really like it, you probably still would like this version because it's a very good, it's like a play on Wuthering Heights. And now the final film version that I watched came out in 2011. It was directed by Andrea Arnold. If you've watched some of her other films, you will kind of know the sort of style that she goes for. It's this very hyper realistic, lots of close-up shots with shaky camera, no music soundtrack, it's just like people breathing or the wind or heartbeats. This is someone who's taken Wuthering Heights as their base inspiration and then done a film. It's not really the story of Wuthering Heights. It's only kind of the first half. We don't have any of the babies in it. I suppose one of the most interesting things about this film is that they've portrayed Heathcliff as black, which does work very well with the story because he's found in Liverpool, which is a dock where ships come in from all over the world, and there were black people in Liverpool, like, he easily could have been black, and he's also described in the book as being a gypsy or being dark-skinned, and people look at him and go, oh, he's so dark. And okay, I suppose he's called a gypsy, but like, black people were around in England at the time. Just because they're not written explicitly into literature doesn't mean they didn't exist and they weren't there. He's a character who easily, believably, and it works very well, him being a different race other than white, and that's a very interesting take on it. It means that the story has been altered slightly. Instead of them calling him gypsy, they call him other horrible words. The language in general in this film actually is incredibly strong. I quite like this film, but then I actually quite like Andrea Arnold's filming style anyway. It's more about whether you'd like the film. It's not about whether you like Wuthering Heights or not. It's not really Wuthering Heights. It's just kind of a film. And I guess that's the stage where we've got to now in Wuthering Heights. Like, do you need more interpretations of it? Probably not. We already have 7, and some of the previous ones are quite good. But what is interesting and what does add to the conversation about Wuthering Heights is something so different like this. So there we are, 7 versions. I reckon it's going to be a really long video, so well done if you stayed with me all the way through. Personally, I think my favourite Cathy is still really Anna Calder-Marshall from the 1970 version. And she's not perfect. You wouldn't ever have a Cathy like that now because she's so over the top, but I love it and I think she's great and I really like her version. My favourite Heathcliff has to be Tom Hardy. It's such a good representation of what I think Heathcliff is in the book, the way I interpret him. I think he does that incredibly well. I'm torn for my overall favourite version because I love that 1970 version with Anna Calder-Marshall. I think most people in that film are really good. I just don't like Timothy Dalton as Heathcliff, and it is only half the story, so it does kind of ignores it very well. Like, it doesn't feel like there's anything missing, but realistically, you can't just do half a book and say that's your favourite version. If you are studying Wuthering Heights at school, or you kind of want to remind yourself about the actual story of Wuthering Heights and get to know a bit better, I think my favourite version has to be that 1998 TV series starring Robert Kavanagh and Orla Bradley. I think that overall that is the best representation that I've seen of the whole film. However, if you want something more modern, that Tom Hardy version in 2008 is also very, very good. It's just not Wuthering Heights. So it depends on the reason that you're watching it for, really. If you're watching it to be entertained or if you're watching it to see an interpretation of the book. That's my first episode of Page to Screen. There was a lot of talking. I hope that was interesting. Let me know if you enjoyed this. I know I've had lots of feedback on other things you wanted to see. Jane Eyre has popped up a lot, as has Great Expectations, of which there's lots of versions of that. So thanks guys. But let me know the kind of things you want to talk about. Let me know if you've seen any of these versions and what you thought of them, whether you agreed with my interpretations, whether you've got other versions that I've missed. This is definitely a new area for me, talking about films instead of books. If there's anything else that you'd have liked me to talk about or mention, then please let me know, because I'd love to build on this and create a really good conversation going about the different ways that people interpret books. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! An intelligent woman, and her fiction is all about the art world, philosophy, history, kind of women's place in society. Oh, it covers so much, and I can't wait to read an essay by her.